Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, April 1st, 2022, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 United States Senate elections for the upcoming November midterms. Now, at the beginning of every month, I have been making videos updating you on the status of the Senate elections as I currently expect the race to go. Looking at the 35 races that are contested for this election season, many of them are easily predictable. The reason why I like to adjust it every month is so we can track it time after time to see how drastically this map has actually changed from the beginning of our Senate election cycle. If you take a look at the LTE projection from back in December 2020, you will find that the map looks a lot different than it does today, especially considering that many more races have given us a better idea of where the Democrats and the Republicans have ultimately ended up. Now, I will make things very clear. The Republican Party maintains their advantage in this map. The Republicans have had such a large advantage, especially considering that they are looking at numbers that are very different than where they were just a year ago, when Biden was up by 10 points nationwide, when the Democrats were up 4 points in the national generic ballot. While it was a significant portion of the honeymoon period, it was still a period that did expect us to see Democrats maintaining the majority in the United States Senate and having a pretty competitive position when it came down to the House of Representatives, though still always the expected result was that Democrats would lose in the House of Representatives. Now, I want to first start out this map by characterizing all of the safe Republican states. This entire video is going to be talking about why the Republican Party still maintains their advantage and how they could actually expand further than where they currently are. Now, you might be surprised to see some of these states characterized as safe, but honestly speaking, I think the Democratic Party just simply doesn't have a chance in many of these states. The Republican Party is completely solid in Florida and North Carolina. If you look at reputable sources like Breitbart and Newsmax, you will find that those polls show it to be true. You take a look at any poll with an R by the name, which typically means, right in the sense that it is a correct poll, you find that Republicans are up 10, 20 points in Ohio and Florida, and you can't really refute that. I mean, you can't really find any election data that shows that Democrats have ever been competitive in Ohio or Florida. Considering the national implications, considering that Biden is down, according to, left-wing sources by just 12 points, you're really putting yourself in a position where you really don't see that Biden is actually down by 30 to 40 points. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I go through this map. Looking at Florida, looking at North Carolina, looking at Ohio, looking at Iowa, truly, but if you take out all of the fake news and the fake polls, you'll find that Republicans are up by insane amounts, enough that hands them the majority simply based off of just where they currently stand. Now, Republicans are currently the incumbents in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, and though Democrats did, try to vie for these positions, truly speaking, the Republican Party just has such a large advantage. You have to understand where these states are coming from. When Donald Trump swung these states by 10 points, it was an irreversible pattern and direction that the Democratic Party really hasn't been able to halt. When you take a look at the election results from the beginning of November 3rd to the end of November 3rd, you will find that Trump was up about 10, 15 points in Pennsylvania and 5 to 10 points in Wisconsin. Keeping that under consideration, you're looking at these two states that by the end of them looked blue, but truly aren't. When you take out all of the falsified and incorrect ballots that have been put into the race itself, you have to understand that these states are still red. You have to understand that the Republican Party very much won these states, and that's why there was a true set of electors cast in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Now, it is interesting to see how our Senate map is now skewed in a way that some people might expect the Democratic Party to at least come close. And honestly, that just isn't within our reality. Already, the Republicans are at 50, and Democrats, quite frankly, don't have any safe states. When you take a look at some of the states that used to be characterized as safe, such as California and New York, think about the scandals that have plagued the governors there. Think about the things that have really brought down top Democratic officials. You have Gavin Newsom, who, despite the election results maybe proving contrary to my point, we're going to completely ignore that because I don't want it to be relevant for the sake of what I'm arguing. You have the state of California where a recall election occurred. That alone should tell you that Democrats aren't going to be solid there. You take a look at the state of New York, where you saw a resignation from Governor Andrew Cuomo, a resignation that was definitely deserved. And I think, looking at the decisions that have been happening in New York with the gerrymander, I think Democratic voters are going to be very upset about seeing something like that. So I don't think it's even fair to characterize those as safe Democratic seats. Republicans have additional safe seats as well. I would even argue that Georgia is a safe seat. You have a football legend. I mean, who could actually beat a football legend in the state of Georgia? Certainly not a pastor, right? Certainly not someone who has been involved in communities and that won under, after the Democrats had won control of the House. I think what you find in the state of Georgia specifically is that Herschel Walker is this unmovable, unbeatable character, and, no one could ever even come close at defeating him in this Senate election. And I think that it's a race that the Democratic Party should recognize now is completely out there and will never be competitive again for the rest of their election careers. Moving over to the states of Arizona and Nevada, I think that the Democratic Party is going to be in for a big shock when they see that these two seats are going to flip to the Republican Party by 20, 25 points. I mean, you are finding top tier Republican candidates in many of these races, and that ultimately tells us that Democrats are going to be behind. When you have Biden down by, in the real polls, 30, 40 points, you can't imagine that he's up by, more than that in Arizona and Nevada and Georgia. Even though, some may claim that he won these states in the 2020 election, and we know the truth, and we know that the Democratic Party simply isn't going to have it in them in order to take this election in 2022. So Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, definitely states that we can characterize as solid red. Now, moving beyond these states, I would say that there probably aren't as many, more solid races that we can characterize. New Hampshire is probably the furthest extent that I would go. In my most recent projection, I characterized New Hampshire as lean Democrat, but now looking at the real news and the real polls, it becomes a better understanding that that state is solid red. That leaves us with 10 remaining races, the Republicans at 54 and the Democrats at 36. Now, those 36 actually don't come from any of the races that we're looking at right now. Those are just races that are currently held by Democrats. I can only imagine in 2024 that number will reduce to less than 30. After 2026, less than 20. Once, more and more of the real information from Mike Lindell and others actually gets revealed to the American public. I think that's something that is very much within our future in terms of American politics. But, 36 to 54 right now means the Republican Party is by a pretty substantial amount. Now, moving beyond into these 10 remaining toss-up races, you have Washington, Oregon, California. Now, Washington, I would say, is in a position where Republicans could actually win here. And I say that legitimately. The Republican Party has a pretty good grip on the state of Washington. They've almost won in the past. And I think considering that they have a very strong frontrunner on the Republican side, it doesn't seem too out of the ordinary. Neighboring Oregon also makes sense. I think we've seen a lot of people talk about the state of Oregon as potentially being competitive. I would go so far as to say that Oregon goes red, right? That Oregon goes to the GOP by less than a point, because we do know that Oregon does have some Democratic roots. But we know at the end of the day that Oregon is still about a lean tilt red state. We know that inherently it is Republican. And so, even if there is election data or polls that prove me wrong, just my gut reaction, and I'm going to go with it. I think that, we should value how we feel personally over any type of data. And that's just the circumstance that I think, we should look at here, that we should value our own personal feelings over data that could tell us a more accurate depiction. That's just my personal take on it. I think a lot of what we see has come from data, but I don't think that is the correct way to go, especially knowing that a lot of these polls are fabricated, that a lot of these polls are misleading on purpose to completely suppress the real amount of support here for certain candidates for whatever reason, which is a discussion for an entirely different video. But I'm not going to tell you that Democrats aren't going to win any of these races. I think that Republicans, while competitive in Hawaii, could still lose this race. I think Democrats still have a pretty strong grip on the state of Hawaii. I think maybe you're talking about a 6-7 point margin of victory for Democrats in Hawaii. Now, California, I've been really iffy about. I think, especially considering that you have numbers that show, Biden down in California, Kamala Harris down in California, that California is really done being a Democratic state. When you see different areas outside of these cities that see Trump signs and Republican signs, you sort of know that, this anecdotal evidence is more so than what the data and what the polls are telling us. That this, individual case where you see more Trump yard signs than you do see Biden yard signs should be enough to tell you that Republicans actually have the upper hand in California. But I will say that I do think the Democratic Party might narrowly edge this out, but I don't know if that's also going to be what some would deem as legitimate. That's also a discussion for a completely separate video. So California, I would say the Democrats win. Hawaii, I would say the Democrats win. But truly speaking, Washington and Oregon are going red. So that leaves us around 6 toss-up races. You have Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. Now, Vermont's an interesting case. In terms of what we have seen historically, Vermont might seem Democratic, but they have a retiring incumbent, which means automatically it's a flip. Knowing that 2022 is going to be this red tsunami, a flip is automatically indicated by a simple retiring incumbent from any of these Democratic seats. Democrats are lucky that they don't have retiring incumbents in any race outside of the state of Vermont. But Vermont, I think, looking at Phil Scott as the governor, that tells you that Republicans can win in the state of Vermont, that it isn't just an individual basis, and that it isn't just the fact that, Phil Scott is this liberal Republican that was able to win because of different circumstances and a different national environment. But, besides the point, I think Vermont has shown us that they can elect a Republican, and there's no reason why they wouldn't in 2022, especially considering that the Democrat is getting out of office. So the Republicans now maintain about a 19-seat advantage across the nation. Democrats do still have some residual support in New York. I think, again, it gets competitive because of everything that has been, associated with the Democratic Party, that voters there might be done partially with the Democratic Party, but I don't think it's to the same extent. Again, remind yourself that these numbers are very different than what you were seeing on your screen. That the polling numbers are very different than what you are seeing, that proven election data from historical numbers are fabricated in an effort to sort of tell you that one political party is not going to perform the same as the other. And we have to keep that in mind as we go through this electoral projection. Now, with the remaining 4 toss-up races, you have races that some people might say just aren't going to be competitive, that Democrats are somehow going to win these by exceptional margins. But we know that's not going to be the case. We can say that Maryland might go to the Democrats by a likely margin. Again, considering that the courts just struck down their gerrymander, Democrats probably aren't going to do well. I think if you look at any place, to across the Bay Bridge in, more eastern Maryland, you find that there are many Republicans there. Where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go to the ballot box, and they're going to come close to electing a Republican. Maryland still has many major cities and many major population centers that give Democrats still an advantage across the state. But I think you will actually find that Maryland is going to be somewhere around, again, like in New York and like in Hawaii, a 6 to 7 point margin of victory for the Democratic Party at most. I think that actually, in a month from now, these numbers could get substantially worse for the Democratic Party. And finalizing on the states of Connecticut, Illinois, and Colorado, it is interesting to see. Illinois is a state that Republicans actually won in years past, and I think very well could in 2022. But I don't know if I necessarily buy that for the state of Connecticut. I think that Connecticut is going to go blue by a lean margin. I think it's going to be exceptionally close, but somehow Democrats are going to be able to pull it off. A lot of residual support here. I think a lot of residual support, and not necessarily enough to combat, the Republicans do not have enough new support to combat the Democratic Party's residual support. So Connecticut for right now, I'm going to be, fine characterizing as a lean Democratic seat. But again, if I have, a swing in my mood or swing in my belief about, understanding some of these polls, or at least acknowledging them as real parts of election analysis, Connecticut's probably going to stay where it is. And in the remaining toss-up race, we have the state of Colorado. Now, honestly, I think looking at the state, we can actually characterize it as safe Democrat. For whatever reason, I think the Democratic Party has a good amount of support in the state of Colorado, more so than in California and New York and Maryland, Connecticut, and Hawaii, and more so than in any of the other states that are currently characterized as red. Seeing that the Democratic Party has had a strong electoral history in the state of Colorado, there's no real refuting that Democrats are going to win this seat. I think with a popular incumbent and a state that, typically doesn't elect Republicans, there is no real reason to assume that Colorado would be anything but safe Democrat. I was considering that Florida also could be joining them in that safe Democratic characterization, but honestly, Republicans still maintain that advantage. We'll see what happens, though. I think Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, New Hampshire definitely have the opportunity at swinging by, double digits before the upcoming November elections. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of my, next video talking about the Senate elections, that the Senate map looks entirely different. But for right now, I'm comfortable characterizing 58 Republican seats and 42 Democratic seats I think this is truly just what the Democratic Party can expect after, going through a bunch of maps and drawing them in unfair ways, and the generic ballot and the Joe Biden approval rating polls and gas prices rising and people seeing that Biden, is scared of some international leaders. A lot of things come into this election analysis and this election anticipation and expectation. And one major factor that also plays into this is just simply the date. I think, understanding where we stand as a nation, what the day actually is, and, where we stand at this individual moment, at this exact point in time, this exact, 4/1/22, what that tells us, especially, when it comes down to this map. So at the end of the day, Republicans flip numerous seats, flip 8 seats from the Democratic Party. Democrats flip 0. And I think that's just the unfortunate reality for the Democrats on April 1st, 2022. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also going to be a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. Tomorrow, I will make a real video talking about the election. I think we are definitely due for some type of Senate update. I apologize for having to give you this very much lackluster and definitely a joke, not at all meant to be taken seriously. But again, I think that some people won't even make it to the end of the video and might actually think that I'm being serious about this. But again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you all tomorrow.